Hey, welcome to this Haftarah. We're in Mattot, which is Jeremiah 1, verse 1 through chapter 2, verse 13. So, interesting. This Haftarah and the next several ones don't have anything to do with the Torah portions. So, instead, beginning with Mattot this week, they're going to be connected to the period of time of mourning that occurs this time of year. Mourning for the destruction of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And so what we're going to be getting into are specifically some prophecies of warning and admonition. So I want to read something that I got from First Fruits of Zion that talks about this time of year, just because if you're not familiar with it, it's kind of interesting. And even if you are familiar with it, it's interesting. So they say that there's these special readings that occur starting with this Torah portion. And it begins after the what's called the fast of Tammuz, which is on Tammuz 17. That's I believe it's the fourth biblical Hebrew month. And in scripture, it refers to it as the month of the fourth month, not necessarily that word Tammuz, which, can have some connotations. So on 3 Sabbaths, they're between this fast and another fast, the fast of Av, we get some haftarahs that center on admonition and warnings. I'm not going to go into the different fasts, although that's its own interesting information. So the first 2 readings of these 3 are consecutive chapters of Jeremiah. Then the third one is the beginning part of Isaiah. And so I will say this a little bit about the fast of Tammuz. It's 40 days after Shavuot, and it marks the day that Moses descended from Mount Sinai and saw the golden calf. And it's mentioned in Zechariah, that's where it says it's the fast of the 4th month. And it's also associated with the breaching of Jerusalem's walls. And then 3 weeks after that is the fast of the 9th of Av. You may have heard of that. That marks the anniversary of the fall of Jerusalem and the destruction of the temple. And there were a number of other things that were said to have occurred on this 9th of Av. So there's this intervening 3 weeks between the one and the other that is called between the straits. So that's kind of like our English idiom, between a rock and a hard place. And it focuses on passages of difficulties of Israel. And then the fast of Av concludes those 3 weeks. And the tradition is to read the book of Lamentations. And then there's 3 special Haftarah readings after that. And then 7 weeks after that, after the fast of Av, there's a series of 7 consolation and consoling passages that are read in the later chapters of Isaiah. So I'm telling you all this because this is what we're going to be coming up upon for the next several weeks, deviating from how the sages would ordinarily do the Haftarahs, where it would tie in with the Torah portion. Okay, so with this idea of coming into the straits, the narrow place, admonitions and warnings, it got me thinking about admonitions and warnings of the prophets. And I want to spend a little bit of time focusing on that. And then at the end of this lesson, I'm going to talk a little bit about one particular verse in our Haftarah. But I had read something and then found it again. I read something that Skip Moen had written years ago about prophets like our prophet Jeremiah from this Haftarah. And he explained that the difference in Greek and Hebraic thinking is why he says that Jeremiah and the other prophets never, like, you never see them coming up with this list of propositional statements and saying, Israel, you need to think these things. You need to believe these things, right? They never came up with a set of statements like a creed, right? Which is interesting when you think about that, because what mattered to them was how they responded, not what they thought. Okay. So Jeremiah was looking for a behavioral response, speaking for God, right? He wasn't giving us like a set of theological truths that we then should take apart and analyze, which I like to do, but that's not how the world worked back then. And I thought, maybe that would be good to bring it up, because it's kind of different than how we do things now. So very, very basic and very briefly, like around 500 BCE, 300 to 300 BCE, somewhere around in there, something called Hellenism began to take hold and begin to affect the way that believers walked out their faith. Okay, so Hellenism is Greek thinking. It's a Greek idea. And let me say straight out of the gate here that this is kind of like our thinking, right? This is pretty much how we are in the West. So it doesn't seem strange to us. And I always say that we read our Bibles with Greek glasses on, because that's kind of like how our system is. And when we do that, we kind of misunderstand what the authors of Scripture were saying to the original audience. Okay, so Hellenism and Greek thinking, we don't have to really study what that is. That's kind of like how we do things. It's pretty much how we live in the West, especially. So the Greco-Roman world made Hellenism the dominant paradigm or worldview of the West. And among its many, many tenets, there's this idea that we move through life with our minds. Like, that's what the ideal, right? The ideal way to move through life is by what we think, not with our actions and what we do. And as Skip Moen says, he says, in Greek thought, what matters is what happens in your head, what happens in your thinking. Okay, so what matters is what you think about, not really what you do about what you think about. Okay, but again, it was different for those in the ancient Near East and in the times of our Torah portions and our Haftarahs. And you and I who are learning Torah, and we're digging in a little bit to the Hebrew language, we know that even in the Hebrew language itself, it's very action oriented and it's very concrete, right? Torah is a culture of obedience, action. So this shift that was brought about by Hellenism, it created this emphasis on theology, and theology just means thinking about God. Okay, so what's happened is we've become a culture of belief. And, you've probably heard me say many, many times, the word believe Hebraically is very active. But in our culture and in Hellenistic and Western and Greek thinking cultures, belief is what you think. So once Hellenism spread, we kind of got, and I'm super simplifying this, but we kind of got the idea that the key to having a right relationship with God is by thinking the right things about Him. And you're probably thinking, yeah, I can see that, right? So being in the kingdom then is demonstrated by having the correct set of beliefs, but not necessarily having the right behavior. Okay. So it's from this belief that kind of sprouted the idea that where the early church split from Judaism, the idea that focusing on actions denied the work of Messiah on the cross, right? And if you trace back early Christian belief, that became very prevalent. It was what you thought, not what you did. But when you think about it, that's very anti-Semitic. That's very anti-Jewish, right? Because Torah is all about action. So doing then in this Hellenistic belief was looked down on in favor of thinking about God the right way. And so we've got these creeds and these beliefs and these statements. You got to, to join a church, you got to sign, I agree to this, I agree to this, I agree to this. None of it's behavior. It's all, I think this, I think this, I think this, right? Now, it may be strange to think that theology or thinking about God as an end in itself isn't a Hebrew idea, because that's how we are raised, right? That thinking about God, having the right thoughts about God, that's an end in itself, because that's so ingrained. But the Hebrew idea is behaving according to God's instructions, no matter what you think. So Hebraically, unless God thinking, thinking about God, unless that becomes acting like God, according to Torah, then it misses the mark of Torah. So, again, I bring that up because we're going to be focusing in the next couple of Haftarahs on a lot of admonition, a lot of warnings about behavior. So I just kind of wanted, this is probably not anything new for you, but maybe just to kind of bring it up to the forefront of your mind, this difference in thinking, right? So I have one more thing I want to share in this lesson, just a little small something that caught my attention, and that's from Jeremiah 1:5. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. Okay. Now, from this, we get the idea that divine knowing also involves singling out, like a choosing of us. And I was thinking about before I formed you in the womb. Have you ever thought about that? Because this is one of the clearest links that we have to the idea of the pre-existence of the human soul. Before I formed you in the womb, before you were conceived, I knew you, right? So God knew Jeremiah prior to his conception because he knew his soul. And then I realized that Paul talks about this too in Ephesians 1:4. He says, for he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight. And then Psalm 139 has a lot, it starts out with, you've searched me, Lord, and you know me. And it goes on, verse 13, you've created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be. Remember my lesson from Nassau back a couple of lessons ago? I proposed the idea that the entirety of Torah is written, is given to us, is taught to us in the womb, but at birth we forget it, right? And then life is about regaining what we once held on to. One of the favorite things I learned this week in one of the commentaries was this, and I'll leave you with this. It was that woman's commentary that I've told you about before. It says that we're well positioned to assume our role in the world because of this aspect. God says, I created you, I knew you, I sanctified you, I appointed you. So, if you believe in God, you need to also believe in yourself. Isn't that cool? And I'll see ya next week.